I have to ask the question, which might be on some people's minds as they're listening to this. There's a big conversation around AI safety, and that we see play out even as high as the presidential conversations. We have our EAC folks versus our degrowth folks. The war is being waged on every front, it feels like, these days around AI safety in particular. And I'm curious how this world intersects with this idea of AI safety. My understanding is that a lot of the sort of safety protocols or processes that something like an OpenAI does or has is like this idea of red teaming, where they send in researchers to sort of test and establish boundaries for what their models will and won't do. And that feels like something that is centralized. And so I'm curious if there are decentralized counterpoints to the AI safety conversation, or is it like in the spirit of crypto and Web3, is it this sort of libertarian free for all, anything goes? Where are we landing here? And I'm sure there's a spectrum.
It's such a great question, and there's a spectrum. And I want to start with
Yes.
like a tangible, real example that's like happening today to make this like a bit more approachable because it's a very meaty thing. And we could probably spend an hour just talking about AI safety and probably like lose a little bit of people. But here's the reality of like what's real today. And I'm like, I will share this article so you can include it in the show notes. But Wired came out with an article specifically from Apple in the Apple Vision Pro, right? And you remember how compelling the Apple Vision Pro was in the eye tracking technology that existed because the haptics and like a user experience was like incredible. Well, what researchers found is Apple was actually able to track up to 92% accuracy your passwords and anything that you would type from their eye tracking technology.
Hmm. Wow.
That is computer vision, that is based on an AI model. And so now you have a company that actually can, just based off your eye patterns and eye movement, can actually fully gain access to any data they wanted to of yours if they really wanted to. And so when we talk about AI safety, I try to frame it in like the real things that are happening today. And mind you, this is happening today at like 2024 AI. We're not talking about 2030 AI. We're not talking about 2035 AI. We're talking like today, what is happening. And so I think where AI safety becomes paramount, becomes really important, is when AI becomes invisible. Because if you think about ChatGPT today, it's visible. It's what's called human in the loop. In other words, like you are giving the input and you're seeing the output and you're experiencing it in real time. Well, what happens when AI becomes invisible? Well, what do I mean by invisible? If you think about any time, the last time you've used your like debit card or credit card and done like the tap to pay, you don't really think about the underlying technology of like an NFC chip and transactions and the transaction fee that Stripe would take from this payment provider. It's all invisible, right? But the reality is like there's significant value capture there, and then that data is used to determine everything from your credit profiling to your credit score, like so on and so forth, right? And so if you add that into the context of AI, and now you're talking about like AI is actually becoming so embedded into our day to day, we're not, again, actively like thinking about any of the implications. That's when safety becomes really, really important. And that's like the practical spectrum of today. You play this out into the future. And now we're actually talking about model capabilities, and we can talk maybe a little bit more about like OpenAI's recent release with O1 and like what does that actually mean and why does that matter, right? You're talking about model capabilities that are becoming and will continue to become so strong. We are introducing reasoning, the ability to decide, right, to AI models. And when AI models have the ability to decide, if you actually read OpenAI, they actually, you have to give credit where credit is due. They publish what's called their safety card or safety report. In other words,
Hmm.
to your earlier comments on like, hey, we red teamed this thing, right? We tried to break it, and here's what it did. OpenAI published this, right? And with their most recent model in O1, what they found is basically they did a test, they gave it a task to complete. I'm not going to get into the technical specifications, but they gave it a task to complete, and they wanted to see how would the model complete this task. The reality is their test was actually broken. The model realized the test was broken, and it circumnavigated the test to build its own environment needed to run it. It ran it and was able to do it successfully. That is the technology that exists
That's
today. That's like
crazy.
some like sci-fi stuff. And here's the thing: it's not going to show up on Twitter, like because you're not going to see it because it's like 40 pages deep in a
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
research report. But I'm like, that is the technology that exists today, and you can
Yeah.
literally read it in the safety report
That's insane.
right now. So when we talk about safety, it's like, okay, well, what are the guardrails to this? Like, who is going to say, like, yes, we approve that? No, we don't. And this goes back to the original piece here of like, we need to provide value to the shareholders. Well, what does the shareholder, value accrue to is the thing that is going to be most monetizable. What I just shared is actually incredibly monetizable, right?
Hmm.
And so that's where it becomes problematic because we have a tension of, well, we can monetize this at scale, but we also need to be incredibly thoughtful about how this might be misused. And so that is the current battle that is being fought right now. Decentralized AI and kind of what I alluded to earlier of like user owned AI plays a role in this, absolutely, in being able to both help create value for those who are like, tackling that problem in microeconomies, but also do that in a way that is verifiable and do that in a way that is, again, on chain and transparent and equitable, right, as well. But it's a real fight.
Hmm.
It's a real fight.